Welcome to another episode where we talk about why a certain slasher villain deserves to be on the Mount Rushmore. We know the original three that everybody loves: Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and Jason Voorhees. But in this series, we dive into why other people deserve to be that last person. Today, we're going to make a case for the fan-picked Leatherface. Leatherface, all to you known as the Hewitt or Sawyer family, because he has gone by two different last names depending on which timeline you follow. Alright, so we always kick these things off with the kill count. So, Leatherface has had 9 movies up to this point, and he has amassed a total of 64 kills. Seems a little lackluster, and when you dive down into it and you look movie by movie, it actually is quite lackluster. But in 2022, we got a new film called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, doing that whole requel thing. They go from taking the very original movie back in 1974, they do a direct sequel. Judging by the count of that movie, there was 22 kills in that movie alone. So, I mean, you're looking at 42 kills in 8 movies. A lot of these movies are sitting at like 3 to 4 deaths. It's not a lot, but I will give it this. When you tune into a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, you know the kills are always going to be good. Point in being, I mean, the bus scene in the new movie probably saved it, but I did find Leatherface to be very brutal. That would probably be the first big push towards him being one of the top 4 slasher killers of all time. He is a large, bulking brute. A big man, yes, he is mentally handicapped. Then they give him like extreme strength. He can take a beating in these movies, but he's just a giant menacing figure who's coming after you. And in a fun side, he does run around. Plus, he has that very, very iconic look. We all know it, the big guy. He's wearing the butcher's little apron on, and he's wielding what is probably the most fun weapon in horror history. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He's running around swinging a chainsaw. It's fun. The sound is very menacing, and they can do a great job using it for scares in a horror movie. And we also have the fact that he wears other people's faces over his face due to his ugliness, his deformities, things of that nature. So his overall look is very iconic. There's not many killers who wear their victim's skin. There are some, but he's probably the most famous. Also, in these movies, you can get a very different Leatherface depending on the movie that you're watching. We've seen him just in the normal look. He's been a very big, bulking, angry brute, like in the remake. He did wear women's clothing and lipstick in one of the movies quite a bit. They've given him a lot of different kind of looks to where he's kind of a cross-dresser / he likes to wear other people's skin. So, he doesn't always look the same. Some are better than others, but he does have a lot of very good looks. I think my favorite look in the entire series is probably from the remake, and I think it was 2003. The one with Jessica Biel. He just looked like a badass in that movie, and the kills and everything, very graphic, very bloody, very gory, very iconic. For me. The next thing I'm going to go with is it was one of the first slashers, and some people consider it the first slasher ever made. 1960s Psycho sometimes gets that title. It is a slasher, but it doesn't really follow traditional slasher rules that we know and love today. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is probably the original on that one. It comes down to that and Black Christmas. This is, a guy stalking and killing his prey, which is other humans. And he has a whole family around with him that help and aid in all of this. And for the most part in the movies, Leatherface is the icon, he is the character, but he does a good job of giving screen time and allowing kind of the other cast and characters to be memorable. In the original one, you have Grandpa. Grandpa is a very memorable character. A lot of people love that character, even though he doesn't seem to do much, but he's still memorable. In the second one, you have Chop Top, which is probably everybody's favorite character in the entire series. Bill Moseley just does a great job in that role, and obviously, if you've seen his later work, it kind of probably all resembles that role for like what Rob Zombie did in the Firefly trilogy with his character. And then in the remake, you have the sheriff. Army does a great job in that role. You couldn't ask him to do a different role. Like, that's him. That's what he is. When you watch him in a movie, that's the role he plays. Like in Full Metal Jacket, even when he was on a TV show like Scrubs playing the janitor's dad, he still has that drop down, give me 20, that kind of asshole-ish thing, which ironically he makes him do in, I believe, The Beginning. He was a returning character for that one where he gets to play the role twice. And that was a nice thing about them doing a prequel to the remake, was it had a lot of blood and gore in it, but it did tie up kind of explaining what had happened to certain characters and how they got there. Anyways, we're getting off the beaten path just a little bit. But I just want to bring up the fact that in 1974, it was a very iconic movie. This was a movie that was banned in a lot of countries because it was just too graphic, too real. And the weird part is when you go back and watch it now, there's almost absolutely no blood in that movie whatsoever. So it's not really a very graphic movie. It's just the tone, the visuals, everything about it that Tobe Hooper chose to do, the running people for 18, 24, 36 hours straight in scenes just to bring out the madness and inhumanity. The house, the iconic house for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the fact that they literally had roadkill brought in there to be authentic for this cannibalistic family, and they just left it in this 100-degree home in Texas, and it stunk to high heaven to where the cast in between takes was throwing up outside the windows. Just because they couldn't handle the smell. Like, that all was happening in real life, and that's what you could see on the screen, which is what made this movie so popular and like such a iconic movie for horror, because we hadn't seen a movie quite like this one. It was like, I would say like Last House on the Left is one of those movies that's kind of like the revenge torture type movies. This didn't go down that route, but with the whole family dynamic and the grunginess of it, it was there, but it brought in the slasher element of a central character going around and just killing off these characters. And that's kind of what made it a special movie and kind of put Tobe Hooper stock through the roof, to where when he did the next movies, you went and seen them because you were expecting something as awesome as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And that came out in 74. We are headed for 2024. So that would be roughly 50 years. And last year in 2022, we got a new movie. So this character is still relevant today. They're still making movies about him. He has his own comic book strip. You can buy comic books. You can see him facing other horror legends like Jason. I won't say not many, because there are quite a few horror comics out there that do have a lot of the people that you love, but to have one based solely on the slasher character himself, it doesn't happen every day, and this is one of the few characters that was given that privilege and that right. Also, horror movies into video games. Not something you always think about, and it is a little more common nowadays, but Fun fact, if you didn't know, the first time Leatherface showed up in a video game was in 1982. Atari got the rights to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they made a game called Texas Chainsaw Massacre where you were Leatherface and your whole object was just to go around and slaughter people. Now, obviously, back in 1982, this game got a lot of flack because people didn't want to see someone going around murdering people in a video game. Plus, video games were geared towards children, so this was one of the first games geared directly towards adults and adults only. Most stores didn't carry it on their shelves because they would have gotten crap for it from parents and people in, the community, stuff like that. But the ones that did had to actually hide it under their shelves to not even have it displayed because of all the attention it got. Then Mortal Kombat 10 came out and you were able to get Leatherface. And of course you got some awesome fatalities with the chainsaw and such. I mean, scenes that you would have always wanted to see in movies. Now you get to see in Mortal Kombat who goes to the extreme with their fatalities and their x-rays and stuff. So you got to see some awesome cool stuff there. And then last year, I believe in 2022, we actually got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game. Due to the success of Friday the 13th, where you play Jason and a bunch of camp counselors, one person becomes Jason and has to hunt everybody down. And this one, you play Leatherface and the Sawyer family. And there's actually more people killing than there is people trying to survive. But your goal is to get away from this family and survive. And of course, people play this game online. It is a lot of fun. It's a big hit. And people love it. So, therefore, he has made the transition into video games. And he's had 2 video games up to this point that were named directly after the franchise. And because of him, he was the focal point. Also, one thing to be known for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is they always say it's based on a true story. Now, we know that's very loosely based because that's Hollywood, and they always say things are based on a true story, and it's very loosely based. But the character itself of Leatherface is based slightly off of Ed Gein, who was a notorious serial killer in the United States. And he would take people's skin, and he would make chairs and lampshades and stuff like that out of it. And that's kind of the connection you have when you go to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You see things in the house that are made out of human skin. So a nice little touch there to nod to American history, stuff like that. Also, we have the very common, costumes, cosplay. People like to dress up as Leatherface. He's not as popular as some of the mainstay characters that you see, but there's still quite a bit of it out there, and there are some really awesome costumes that you can do. Another thing that puts Leatherface at a little bit different level than some other people is, if you remember between the second and third movie, somehow in part 3, we see that he has a daughter. So that means Leatherface did the dirty and had a child, which we all know is very, 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 very rare for a slasher killer to then become a parent. I believe I mentioned it in the Chucky video that yes, he had Glenda. And there's not many more. You don't see Jason going around knocking up the counselors. Michael Myers isn't knocking up the babysitters. Freddy Krueger isn't knocking up the teenagers on Elm Street. But Leatherface is knocking up the kids in the podunk town of Texas. Yep, that's the rare part. Now, talking about the movies, there is 9 total. And the nice thing about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise is, or maybe it's not for some people, but you could pick about 6 different timelines in this series to pick up where you want to start and watch movies. You can watch the first one, which is a straight up slasher, and then the second one, which is kind of a horror comedy and goes way over the top and for a whole different flavor. You can watch the third one, which is probably the most slasher-esque Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, but I also think it's the most forgettable one. When you watch it, there's not a whole lot that you can remember later on, so it's not extremely memorable. You get the Next Generation, where it's mostly known for Matthew McConaughey's performance because he's way over the top, and it's one of his first leading roles in a movie. And you had Renee Zellweger in this, doing one of her first roles in a horror movie. So it kind of did spawn those two actors and actresses, but other than that, the Leatherface itself is not very redeeming in that one. We have the remake, which is my favorite. I know a lot of people think that they scoff at that, but it was my first introduction to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And he's big, he's bulking, he's brutal. The kills are brutal. You can feel like when he chops off that guy's leg and shoves his salt in the wound, when he sticks him up on the hook and stuff like that. And the way it's just shot, that was a very good movie. You have the prequel to that, which is decent still. I do find it fun because it kind of sticks with that same kind of formula, but it does fall off the rails a little bit on its explanation. We have 3D, which to me is probably one of the worst ones from the franchise. We have Leatherface, which is a whodunit, which prequel to the original, or maybe it's a prequel to 3D and it's a whodunit, which why we have a whodunit in a Leatherface series is beyond me. And then you have the remake, requel in 2022, where we follow the events of the first one, and they bring back the central character who survives in the first one, Sally Hardesty, and they make her out to be a Texas Ranger, but they kill her pretty easily. And as a lot of people yelled at the end of that movie, it's woke, it's woke, it's woke, because this was the big push of female empowerment, as if we didn't have female empowerment in the entire series. I mean, if you follow the whole line, that's exactly what horror is. It is female empowerment. So the argument and gripe on that one, I'm not quite sure of. But you do get a kind of a different flavor in a lot of these movies. I won't say they all nail it. That's the one thing about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series that kind of would make Leatherface kind of fall down the rings a little bit, is the quality of movies is all over the place. Like, the original one is iconic and people love it. I saw it later in life. It was a little dated for me, but it was still enjoyable, but I didn't get the same feeling that people get when they watched it at much younger in life. The second one is just a very fun, good time. It's what you want, I guess, in a second movie. Like, you want something a little bit different and not quite so serious. Like I said, the third one, forgettable. The fourth one, off the rails. That's why the remake to me is so good, because it brought it back to its roots, going for tension, going for scares. That's one of the nice parts about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, is even though they are very limited on their number of kills, they still have good kills, and they still drive a lot of dread, a lot of tension, and a lot of fear, and that's pretty much due partly by Leatherface and his chainsaw. So that's my reasoning as to why I think Leatherface could deserve a spot in the top 4. I know a lot of people hold him near and dear to their heart. I'm not quite as high on that part as I am other people, but he's still a very iconic character nonetheless. When you think of the greatest slashers of all time, you think of Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason, Chucky, Leatherface, Ghostface. Pinhead is another one that people bring to mind. If you want me to do another video in this series, which I plan on doing regardless, put in the comments down below who you want me to do next. I've heard Pinhead, Pennywise, Art the Clown. If there's anybody else, Leprechaun, somebody mentioned to me once, I will make a case for them, going through their history and kind of how they've affected stuff outside of horror, which is what I think about all of these people. They have all had an impact on people that are not big horror fans. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this to other people who love horror movies and might have a say in who the top 4 slasher killers are of all time. And until the next one, guys, rest in peace.